We're going to start recording this. So it's my pleasure and honor to host this panel with a lot of great speakers and experienced entrepreneurs and also VCs. So this is part of a series of webinars that we are organizing for our A-Star Bootcamp. I'll talk a bit more about the A-Star Bootcamp later, but for this webinar, our focus is on answering the question, what is AI first strategy and how do we, help companies building that. And so, joining me today, we have two founders, entrepreneurs, and one investors. Actually, very cool that we have 50% gender. So, I'm quite excited. To start out, I would love to have our guests give a brief introduction about yourself, and maybe talk a bit about your journey so far, and how you approach AI. How have you approached AI? Let's start with Beth first.
Okay.
Please.
So I have been an entrepreneur and then also a big company person. And long back in the dark ages, I also was an arms controller, nuclear dismantlement of the former Soviet stockpile.
Wow.
That was my first go around with even the concept of AI. That was back in the really a long time ago when it was in early stages, and we were trying to use it for verification purposes. It was quite interesting. But the bottom line for me is that my journey with AI really began when I come from the media and entertainment technology space, in particular, large film production, companies like Marvel, companies making the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Industrial Light and Magic, Weta Studios, companies that make, they work on petabytes of data just for a single shot. And even back in the olden days of movies like Lord of the Rings, the management of the data, of the metadata coming off of the material was becoming unmanageable. And so my co-founder and I, had this idea that if we could take advantage of the new, simpler way of thinking through AI with tools like TensorFlow that were coming out just for R&D purposes from Google, and marry that to what was happening in the Box and Dropbox world, we could help professionals in our space actually just have a much more simplified view. So we actually started in the quote AI first space, but our idea wasn't that we would write the AI. It was that we would write the framework from which they could launch that AI and start to train it for their own purposes without the requirement to become data scientists themselves. We figured that the world would present them with the data scientists and the data science, that the hard part would actually be not having to throw away the tool sets that they were already working with to make the content, to manage the content. And the hard part would actually be what the venture capitalists poo-pooed as the plumbing. Yeah. And it turned out to be that it's actually turned out that is the hard part. It was very hard for us to build it. It's actually hard for these companies and anyone here who actually comes from those larger organizations and is even paying attention to what's going on in adoption rates of the analytical side of big data. And big data, AI as applied to big data, knows that 80% or more of the projects just simply get abandoned. And it's because it's very hard to apply the models and actually even come up with a good idea of what you want to do with those models, which means you don't come up with a particularly good idea of what the data problem is and then how you apply that data problem. And so it's actually a very interesting problem to be AI first. And so it's rather difficult. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about what Manga thinks and V thinks and what everybody here thinks, because it's a very difficult problem to solve unless you're solving it for a very, very specific constrained problem. I know where it works. I've seen it work in certain places, but not necessarily in my company, not necessarily in my company. I've seen it work in customer service, for example, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
So that's my experience with it. It's starting to catch on, but it's really a long process.
Yeah. So basically, you've been doing a lot of heavy lifting to enable other companies to at least have a shot at building their AI first, startups, right? To take
That's
away
right.
some of the hard part.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And one of our goal is for this group here to be able to simply push the button on our system and have an enabled media platform for this, right? Because media is really hard to work with, right? Just straight data is hard enough, but media, like heavy, hard types of data to work with. So that's our goal is for you guys all to be able to just zero up, plunk.
Yeah.
And you don't have to throw away all of the things that you've been working with.
Yeah.
But it's a hard.
So if anyone here wants to start an AI company, they would definitely should start looking at your product, right? See if they can apply it.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're media, if you're a media company or you have a hard, you have a lot of, visual data, visual analysis to do, and you're looking at visual. Yeah, definitely. That's that. Our stock and trade is the visual side, because that's what we, have all done for a living for millions of years.
Yeah. Thank you, Beth. Okay. So next one, lady first. So I guess we'll go with V. Please give a short intro about yourself and then your journey so far.
Sure. Thanks VII for organizing this wonderful event. So I'm V, and I'm the general partner of Blue Ventures. We are $50 million US venture fund investing in technology companies in Vietnam. Some of our notable investments include Manabi, MFAS, and Palexi. So I first learned how to code back in 1999. So at the time I was around 12, and at the time, I didn't know anything about AI. So I started applying machine learning during the time I was building my e-commerce platform, mostly in 2014, 2015 period. At the time, I wanted to build recommendation engine and deliver personalized experience for shoppers. But today, I want to talk more about Palexi, one of Blue Ventures' recent portfolio company. So Palexi enable offline retailers to gather insightful data about customers, including customer demographics and their purchase journey. The reason why we decided to invest in Palexi because we were impressed with the company computer vision engine and its ability to deliver data and meaningful insights to retailers. So I think it's hard to define AI first company, especially from Vietnam, right? But I think Palexi can be considered as a company trying to become AI first, because without the core AI technology, Palexi cannot deliver any service to its business clients.
Yeah, very cool. I think Palexi has been making a lot of good progress, in the space, and a fantastic team. So I know Tom really well. So do you feel like the companies like Palexi are coming more and more in terms of, that like similar types of company that in the Vietnamese market so far, or still some of the rare rare
I
ones
hope to
that
see more.
yeah.
I hope that all the founders joining this, wonderful event today, they're trying to build more products like that, and we love to invest.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. For all the listeners out there, if you're building your awesome AI first companies, you know who to call. All right. So for the last but not least speaker, I would like to welcome Mangit. And Mangit, please give us some short intro about yourself and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Mangit. I am the co-founder and CEO of Anvil. That's useanvil.com. My journey, I started out in, I guess it's hard to follow Beth and V. I did not do arms control. I am not a VC, but my journey has always been in software engineering and product design. Previously, prior to starting this company, I worked at a handful of technology companies in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, notably Dialpad, Dropbox, and Flexport. So mostly been a software engineer and a product engineer or product manager at these companies. And then started Anvil about 3 years ago. When we started Anvil, I guess a little bit of background about what Anvil does. What we're trying to do is to provide the kind of infrastructure for automating and simplifying paperwork and PDF. So if you have a business process today that uses the PDF to collect information, normalize information, and then like do something with that information, Anvil helps you convert that process into an online first, data first process, and really provides the infrastructure so you can focus on your product and not focusing on managing PDF servers and other tedious type development tasks. When we started our journey in Anvil, we knew there was applications for AI, but we deliberately actually avoided the term AI, especially when fundraising. I think the one thing that was very important to us is, we understand the limitations of AI today. We understand that a lot of the challenges is actually in having a large enough data set and a clean enough data set to be able to actually train your models on kind of the data you have. And as with most startup companies, you're starting from zero. So we don't really have a data set. We didn't have a data set, and we were kind of building tools really focused on automating paperwork. And in the process of tagging the documents and building up this automation layer, you essentially would create the data set over time. So I think we're not there yet, certainly, but I think a long-term vision for us is to actually be able to build models and AI on top of the data set that we will eventually have. So I would say, we maybe not AI first, or maybe AI adjacent is a good term, or I don't know, AI long-term is kind of our vision, but that's kind of our journey right now with AI. We are funded by Gradient Ventures, which is Google's AI-focused venture fund. I know Beth is as well, so see the big thumbs up. And one really nice thing about them is they actually understand the challenges with AI. My first question to the partner at Gradient when they reached out to us is, why are you reaching out to me? We're not an AI company, and made him explain to me why he thought we would be a good company for their portfolio.
Who's your partner?
And that really does. Darian
Yeah.
is our partner. Yeah, he's great. And I think that really separates the investors who are AI buzzword, and then the investors who are like actually understand AI. So I think that's very important. But that's a little bit about my journey and the company's journey.
Yeah, thank you, Mangit. Definitely, I've seen a lot of AI buzzwords, right, throwing around in this stuff where people are trying to claim, get on the AI bandwagon. And, it's actually fascinating to hear how you holding back and starting to, identify all the pieces. Would love to dive more into that, in a second when we get into like, more deeper questions. But yeah, so let's start with one question for all the panelists here. So in 2017, I believe, Google is the first big company that officially switched from mobile friendly to AI first strategy. And so when we talk about like mobile first versus mobile friendly, right? It's quite clear. We're talking about building a product from the ground up that center around user experience across different mobile platforms versus mobile friendly, just sort of having a web view of your product that can be loaded on mobile, right? But when we come to AI, it actually is a little bit more complicated than that. Right? So from your point of view, what does it mean to be AI first, versus AI friendly or AI applicable? Please, Beth.
It's buzzwords.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm going to be really, really frank here. This is where I don't even need a drink. I don't even need a shot on this one. I've been working with them on the AI side for a long time at Google, and they lost the mobile war. And they are desperately trying to find a business model to make AI work for them. And they can't sell, then they're losing that business side as well. And so this is a buzzword war to compete in any way against the top people, the top companies that are just absolutely eating their lunch. GCP is dying, and it's it's a terrific group, individually group of people, but the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and it's wonderful, again, wonderful people. They're great to work with until suddenly the next thing you know, there's another group of people out of GCP that have just installed an entire system on top of the system that you've been working with your group to get done. And the group that you've been working with didn't even know it happened.
Interesting.
So I think that what they'd like to say is that AI first means everything we do is going to be understoried by AI, and we're going to have thinking machines everywhere, and it will be IoT wonderland, and everyone's going to have a thinking machine on their desk, and but the fact of the matter is it's marketing, and they're desperately trying to compete against Amazon and Azure, and frankly, they're trying to compete against Oracle, and they're not even doing particularly well at that. So I'm sorry, that's one person's opinion here on a 200 plus people on here, but I'd be very curious if others have found the same thing, or if anyone would. I'd be delighted for somebody to tell me I'm completely. I have in fact put shots of something in my glass of water.
No,
are we playing the pundits? Sorry, are we playing the pundit war now?
Go. Love it.
I love this
actually,
yes,
I would love to understand that a little bit more, I guess. I'm trying to separate GCP and Azure and these like AWS infrastructure platforms from kind of your description of AI. So I'm trying to, I guess in my mind, I view them as separate things. I think there's the platforms by which you run applications on and do kind of the processing on, but then there's the AI models and the training that you would then run on those platforms. So I guess I would love to understand a little bit more what you mean by like GCP is dying, and kind of like how that applies to like the AI argument.
So the argument, here's my argument. My argument is they can say AI first, but one of the problems that they're having is convincing clients to do anything other than experiment with their models, because it's very difficult for them to use them at scale, to use them on real scale business critical applications, because there's a gap between the business's systems and the GCP infrastructure. And the thing that Amazon and Azure and even Oracle and their competitors have done is they have gone out and they've acquired, or they've built themselves this layer of services that easily connect into applications, if you will, and services that easily connect into the businesses that they're selling into, that provide actual services into it. And Google's actually missing that layer. They're missing a partnership network. They're missing the apps themselves, and they're missing a kind of a crack professional services group that can go in there with, their tools and, kind of do something quickly.
Got it. That makes a lot more sense, but I think my confusion was really in like Google using AI internally. I mean, if we're going to list a handful of companies that do AI today, Google doing AI internally, I think they're doing a pretty good job. But
they're doing a great job.
Yeah,
they're doing a great job.
But I think to leverage Google's infrastructure to then run AI applications, I totally understand where you're coming from now.
No. They're doing a great job internally. Nobody crunches it internally like Google.
So what if we sort of narrow down a little bit more into our products, right? Google is doing too many things. So, so let's say for Google search or Google Assistant, I think it's quite interesting because in the beginning they were talking about finding people to look for the right information, right? Accessibility of information. But I think they've been sort of angling it at like having people to do tasks, right? So that if they can perform, user can do tasks in the most efficient way. So from that angle of Google search, Google Assistant product, then does that change your definitions or thinking about this AI first versus AI friendly? Yeah, maybe start with Beth, and then we'd love to hear V and Mangat as well on this.
Oh, you don't start with me. It's not fair. I'll just dominate the whole conversation. V took her.
All right.
V went off.
Let me try to give the buzzword some credit. It's a funny story. I hate buzzword as well, so I completely agree with you, Beth. but in this case, I think it's a nice term to hear nowadays, and it changed the mentality of building products, right? So I tell you from my point of view, I think. So I just want to echo Tuk's example, right? For the Google search engine, I think the core business is the search engine, right? So without AI, you cannot deliver good result, right? So basically, you won't be able to compete against other search engine. So literally, I think they put AI as the core, right? The center of their business. It's really different from, let's say, I'm running a fashion shop, right? So without AI, customers still come and buy my stuff, right? With some AI, maybe I'd be able to display my product better or offer a more personalized experience, right? But without AI, I can still sell some product. So I think that's my definition of AI first versus AI friendly. Just the way I try to understand the term that people are trying to label, right? But I think it's mostly it's the way founders build their business, right? So if your core, I think it should start with the core issue you're trying to solve. But if that core issue, in order to solve it, you need to apply some sort of automation or how getting a lot of massive data, and instead of letting a lot of people trying to do it manually, you allows the machine to somehow help you to do it more efficiently. I think that is the mentality of building an AI first company. I'm saying the buzzword. I like your answer, Beth, because it's very blunt, very frank, and right now, I think most of the term being used is mostly buzzword, but we still need the mentality to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so basically, that in your opinion, the core, if you take away the AI, right, you wouldn't be able to build the business around it, because that's where the AI would enable the companies to do what they claim to do, right? Very interesting. what do you think, Mangit? So maybe let's um, hear from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of building on V's point, I actually would say that the product that Google's product isn't so much the search engine as it is the searcher, the person typing into the search engine. And the AI is, crunching all that data and trying to deliver better results to that person in an effort to sell them more ads or an effort to promote more buying of a certain product. And so that's the real product. The product is you, right? And so if they're able to be better at predicting what you want, or even maybe if in the near future or currently, or maybe even now, maybe we just kind of like bow to our AI overlords and just kind of let them guide us, right? Then they kind of can dictate commerce. They can dictate a lot of things online using this kind of AI first approach, right? So the AI first approach really is meant to, I think it started off pretty nice, I guess. It's like to try to provide better suggestions, provide better ads, provide better kind of better things for the person who's searching for these for the items that they're searching for. But over time, I think it's become less of a suggestion and more of a lead. It leads you towards a direction. So that's when I think of AI first. And honestly, I think Google is doing a really good job of providing suggestions of things that I didn't even know I wanted, or maybe that's what they want me to think. But so that's when I think of when I think of AI first, and instead of like AI friendly. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. When I was at Google, I was working in a group. It's called Google Now, Google Assistant. And I think one of the things that they trying to do is actually to predict your searches even before you do so. So that, when you press on the search button, they will show you all the different queries answered already, because of the context, whether you walking and all that, you're driving home or you're already at home. And so that, I think that's part of the prediction that, you are gearing towards, here, Maggie. Beth, you have any things to say, towards this?
I'm going to
Last
agree with
point?
both of them very strenuously. V made some terrific points, I think, about data, and AI is really, in my view, about dealing with quantities of data that humans are not well suited to.
Yep.
And very frankly, if you've got a startup that is, dealing with levels of data that aren't suited to AI, your models aren't going to be good, and the analysis you're getting out of the data, the data science isn't going to be good. So you might as well use this squishy wetware in between your ears of a good data analyst. And so, I think there are a lot of businesses that really aren't going to have any need for these sorts of tools. That said, if your plans are to become a large organization, or your plans are to do something that requires, like Vu's company, that requires your dramatically growing natural language processing requirements in multiple languages, with the requirement for extremely subtle verbal cues, that's not something that you're going to hire a bunch of people for. And that's when you really want to take a hard look at what your data science approach is going to be. I also totally agree with Mangit, about the fact that you are the product, are Google's product, and all of that, everything about you is funneled into their need to sell ads. They remind me of Microsoft back in the 90s, right? They have one business model that just is in the basement, just cranking. It's just a money mill. It's just cranking, and everything else is kind of not really making a lot of money, and nothing else is really a product, and they don't really have a good product development model around anything else. They put, you know, again, I'm an image person. They put $1 billion into Picasa or more, and they simply canceled it.
Mm-hmm.
and it was such a great product.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, it crushed us, right? So, you know, we'll see. And somebody said they disagree GCP is dying. I actually have, you're 100% right. The models are amazing. There's no question about the data science being fantastic. It's the business. I actually have some inside scoop on the fact that the GCP business is in some trouble. So just
one other point I wanted to add is really, I think the fact of the matter is, you know, oftentimes heuristics will get you a lot further, a lot quicker than you trying to spend all this effort on AI, right? And so like AI is a way of taking a data first approach to get to intuition. And the problem is like the fact of the matter is you already have intuition in your head. And so, you know, half the time you don't really need to bother. So actually I saw a question come in here from Hui Tran. It was like, what are the challenges with AI that you avoid mentioning and pitching it to investors? And I think that's exactly it. It's like, usually if you're going in and pitching AI, like you're essentially saying, hey, I have this like great mathematical way of teaching a computer to do essentially what I could do right now, but I can't explain, right? It's intuition, and it's really like oftentimes if you just took your intuition and codified it into heuristics that you can run in your system, you get a lot further, a lot faster with a lot less data. And it's only when you start hitting the bounds of that heuristics that you really should be thinking about actually applying AI to your system. And hopefully by that time you already have enough data. Right?
Right.
So that's
Interesting.
Which is a really smart way of saying what I said in a very dumb way, right? I was very dumb, and Munkit was very smart. It was, you know, it's like, you gotta just, unless you're dealing with just so much data, you can't deal with any more data. It's
right.
It's really.
Yeah. So an interesting point here you guys brought up. Yeah, that definitely data is one of the key consideration, right? When you start thinking about applying AI or, you know, building up your AI arsenal. So what are the other consideration here? You know, let's say, okay, so maybe we should move away from AI first, since it's a very controversial term with the panel so far. Let's call it, you know, AI focus, right? You know, you want to build your companies around, you know, like a strong AI core component. What would be the key consideration here? You know, I heard that data is probably one. When you have, you know, too much data, or, you know, the type of data that is impossible for a human to shift to efficiently, then definitely, you know, you should look at AI. But is there any other key consideration, even against it, using it?
I have some issues with the bias factor.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that we should all be extremely up to date on what's happening in that world. There's a book called Weapons of Mass Distraction that I think everyone in this field should read if you haven't. Weapons of Mass Distraction, not destruction, distraction. I'm sorry. No, sorry, that's a different one. Weapons of Math, M-A-T-H, destruction.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll look it up, and then
Kathy O'Neill,
and share with the
it's
audience.
really important for everyone on this who are in the startup world thinking about being in the machine learning space. to read that book, because it's not just an ethical issue, it's a business issue. Because it can take your business down.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Beth. V, what's your
My
take on
point,
that?
I think I always start with the purpose, right? Why I need to apply AI and what is the core issue that I'm trying to solve, that, you know, with applying AI, it can help me to do my job better, right? So I give you an example that back in the time I was doing my e-commerce business. So we have warehouses in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, and a few, you know, in a few other cities, right? So one of the things that we're trying to understand is how to reduce logistic costs. So we know some items can, you know, be sold in Ho Chi Minh, and, you know, similar item can be sold in Hanoi, right? We're trying to predict the type of, you know, the unit, right? We can sell in each city, and then before the campaign start, normally we can sell very bulky item, right? We cannot ship from Ho Chi Minh to Hanoi. It costs us tons of money. So we try to pre-distribute those kind of items to the right location, right? Before we can really ship last mile to the customers. So I would always start with, you know, some of the business challenge or some of the things that we're trying to achieve, right? For that particular case, I'm trying to save logistic costs, because when I ship some bulky item like diapers, you know, I cannot spend too much on logistics, right? Because my margin is so thin. Right? If I spend on logistics, then, you know, my company will run out of cash, for example. So I think my point to add in is, you know, beside the amount of data you can collect, right? Obviously, if I just sell a few items, I don't need to do that. But now I need to do, you know, I need to sell a lot of items, right? And I need to really predict the demand from historical data, right? Trying to predict the demand and try to redistribute my items to the right warehouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, you know, if the ROI is there, right, the value that the AI algorithm is actually worth, you know, building all this infrastructure, plumbing, and, you know, analysis, right, for the data, then, you know, then you start to adopt it. Yeah.
Another point I want to point out is, you know, at small scale, right, I can have my team who know math to do that. Right?
Absolutely.
Trying to come up with some, you know, but sometimes they're right. Sometimes, you know, like, I think they need to go out on Friday as well, right, with their girlfriend. So I think I would try to automate it a bit, right? If I have like thousands of SKU trying to do the same thing, I cannot have, you know, like 10 people on the job. So I appreciate the values that AI bring to us.
Yeah, great point. What about you, Manggit? What are the key considerations you would take?
And what, yeah, I guess just to clarify on whether to use AI or be AI friendly within your company.
Well, yeah.
I think what I'm hearing both from the other panelists as well is it really comes down to, again, predicting behavior and predicting things that you would normally be able to predict using intuition. If in Anvil's case, you know, we're building a tool that helps people to convert PDF workflows into online workflows. You can kind of upload a PDF and do a bunch of tagging yourself. But ultimately, we don't want people to have to do the tagging. It's tedious, it's painful. So we want to help them do that. And the way we help them do that is kind of by predicting what their behavior is going to be in order to automate that process a little bit more and make it a little bit smoother. So, but I guess if I were sitting over the shoulder, looking over the shoulder of every one of our customers trying to build out a workflow, and I'm watching them, as a person who's seen enough of those, I would probably be able to guess what they're trying to do or what the next step is before they even do it. And so the goal is to let the computer get the computer to do that for you automatically. And so I would say the consideration I would have for thinking about AI is really like, how do you quantify something that currently falls in the realm of kind of like social science, you know, something that isn't data and numbers, it's like intuition and human behavior. How do you quantify it in a data-driven way in order to then, you know, translate it into something that a computer can do? And that would be the consideration I would be taking. So, and like V's point, that logistics is predicting demand, predicting human behavior, and you know, demand for a product. So I think that, yeah, that would be my approach.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Since I have you here, basically you are building out your AI algorithm, right? Starting with, data collecting, starting with, building that intuition, see what you're trying to figure out what your AI algorithms should predict or, will be able to provide to your customer, right? So could you share with us more on what are the challenges you have come across along this path? And your advice for startups to be able to build a successful AI focused, AI friendly strategy.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, we're not building our own algorithms or AI algorithms. If you are a startup and you're like dead set on using AI, I would go check out Beth's company and use somebody else's pre-trained models, right? Like don't bother with training your own models, because somebody else has a larger data set, has enough well-tagged data in order for you to actually, get the results that you want out of the model that you're thinking of. For us, we're not in that phase. We're actually still in the phase of like building a product, and we're very product centric. So the AI aspect of it is a very long-term vision, in the sense that like it's kind of like it's always like 5 years ahead. And one day, if we keep our eyes focused on that distant future long enough, we'll look backwards and be like, hey, we actually have enough data that's well tagged, that like thousands of people have tagged for us, in order to then make this system, this workflow building tool, this workflow that's created by a person, more efficient automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that that's kind of our approach. It's like really focused on building a good product that people want to use, and then the data aspect of it, it's kind of like just keeping that in mind, but not really making that your main focus. Unless your whole business is collecting data and selling that data, then maybe it's a little bit different. But for us, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. But then, so I get it. You're collecting data right now, but data is vast, right? And there's so many different aspects of data. So how do you go about it? Like what type of data are you collecting? What attributes are you collecting? Do you actually sort of have like a Northern Star that you're following, or you just like, okay, I'm just gonna try to keep as much data, as rich data as possible, sort of approach here?
Yeah, I mean, our focus is on documents and forms and PDFs, right? So the data that we're collecting is people uploading a PDF form and then saying, this is a name field, this is an address field. The structure of this field is 2 lines for the address field, or like 5 boxes for street, city, state, zip, something like that. And then also the labels they apply to those. Like, if you take a look at, I know everybody here is mostly from Vietnam, but like in America, we have these god awful things called tax forms. And if you look at them, they're named like they'll ask for the same information in different ways. They'll say, asking your name, it'll be like, tax person name, or it'll be like first name, last name. Asking for your income or whatever, it's all these different ways to ask the same question. So how do we make sense of it so that when we come across a way that somebody's asking for a piece of information that we've never come across before, we can actually predict what that question is asking for in a programmatic way, that is easy for a human, but probably pretty hard for a computer to do deterministically. So you have to do it statistically, and like with AI. So that's the kind of data we're focused on collecting. It's really the ways that people ask for information and normalize information using documents and forms that they've created. That's the data that we're collecting today. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Megan. To you, Beth. So, what would the advice that you would give for startups then? And, what are the challenges you have seen people struggling with that, your company are trying to solve with your pipeline and infrastructure?
So those are kind of two different questions, because the companies that we work for tend to be established and work with, you know, huge data already. But so let me take the first one first for a startup. For a startup, and I'm following some of these questions here. For a startup, it's the same advice I'd give any startup. What do your clients need? Like, what is your reason for existence, and what is it that you are uniquely providing to your client? And then what is it about AI that can help you uniquely provide that to your client? And really dig into whether there is something about embarking on that path of machine learning that makes sense. Are you a data scientist? Does it actually make sense for you to use data in a way that helps you get there? Because if you have to hire a data scientist, that's pretty expensive. I agree with Mungit. There are a lot of pre-trained models out there. A lot of them are pretty good. That said, depending on your unique circumstances, you might have to mess around with them quite a lot to make them particularly useful to your bread and butter, if you will, of your business. So think hard about it. Think really hard about it, but just stay true to your core business. What is it that your clients need, and what is it that you uniquely provide to your client to meet those needs, and how do you do it? And if AI and machine learning fit into that, then by all means do it. But don't be AI first just because someone said you need to be AI first. Google says you need to be AI first. Do it because you're going to be dealing with a huge amount of data to meet the needs of that client. I love Mungit's AI adjacent concept. Ours was AI first because our clients needed it AI first. Our clients deal with, they were in the 1980s and 90s, those guys were literally 9 out of the 10 supercomputing centers were our customers.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so we were dealing with big data before the term had even been coined. And we realized, my co-founder and I realized that if we could make it easier for them to take advantage of AI somehow, that it would be a skate park for them. Now, of course, that was you know, everybody's dream is that. Right. And of course, you know, like all skate parks, you know, somebody's going to walk away with broken bones. But it turns out that in fact it was the right idea. It was the right idea, and they're starting to see that in fact, it's the right idea.
So what were the challenges that, you know, go into building that skate park? And you know, adjacent question is, how do you make it safer for everyone, right? So that the people would walk out, you know, without a broken bone.
Well, you know, building the system was harder than we thought, and part of it had to do with the fact that dealing with visual media is just a really hard problem, even though we had been the ones who made the images. I mean, we were the ones who wrote and won Academy Awards for writing the rendering systems, and the, you know, Emmys for actually doing, and Academy Awards for actually doing the effects. I mean, we knew how the asset management systems work for Sony Pictures and Weta. We wrote those systems. We knew that, but it turned out to be a very different problem when what you were doing was, you know, creating it in an era of, you know, a different kind of database structure or a non-database structure, right? And a different and in the new AI models that were coming in, and we wanted to make sure that you could use it with Azure and AWS, and containers were coming in. I mean, there was just a lot of new technology that was coming in that we wanted to make sure our clients could take advantage of. And it turned out to be a much more difficult problem to architect something like that and make it open with APIs and flexible. So it just turned out to be a much harder problem. And the good news was it was hard for everybody to do. You know, the bad news was it was a lot harder to do than we thought. So, you know, fortunately we got a head start on everybody, but it just turned out to be a longer process than we thought.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you, Beth. All right, so last question from me would be for V. So what is the landscape for, you know, AI friendly, AI adjacent, AI focused companies in Vietnam in the next 5 to 10 years? And then what is your expectation for these companies, you know, as part of an investment decision in the near term?
Yeah, so I'll start with my point of view on the business, right? So I want to echo Beth's point. So what is the business problem that you want trying to solve, right? So I always think about the advantages when you do the business. Let's say you're entering a sector where there's so many incumbents, so many competitors. You need to be able to, you know, leverage your strength, right? And either you try to lower the cost, right, to provide a cheaper price, or you're trying to provide a high quality products. Like, you know, I would use the example is Netflix, right, or Spotify. Actually, we have so many movie platform and music platform in Vietnam, and you know, like in Vietnam, we watch private content, it's free. But now Vietnamese pay for content, right? We pay for Netflix, we pay for Spotify because we like the quality of those you know, recommendations, right? So that is the second strategy. Try to offer, you know, more premium products because you can deliver better quality. So I would try to start somewhere with the advantages that we want to build. But that's so long term, right? Unless you have, you know, scale or data, right? You cannot do any of that. So that is the challenge. But my experience is that you need to think about that, and you need to be able to find a niche market, right? And enter and win over that niche market before you can expand, right? So I would try to always put that on my mind. And then the second step for us, when we look at the company in Vietnam, is we know Vietnam is still a big consumption market, right? Because we had 100 million population, and we have the young audience, you know, the young generation of consumers that demand more user-friendly products and more intelligent products, I would say. And they're willing to buy products from overseas platform, right? They're willing to pay on the Apple Store, right, to use good product. So I think looking forward, I was use this analogy. So 10 years ago, when I started doing e-commerce, I have to convince all these fashion brand in Vietnam to just open an online store, right? It's 2010. And then I go, you know, one brand to another, just to convince you need to start the online business. At the time, it was a challenge for me. But now, when you build a fashion brand in Vietnam, it's a prerequisite that you need an online presence, right? No question asked. So that's a 10-year story about, you know, online, going online in e-commerce. But now we look at, you know, AI-friendly type of product. I think, you know, in the next 10 years, right? I think the key differences between companies would be how they leverage, you know, machine learning and AI to provide a better experience or to provide lower cost products to the consumer. So definitely, I would encourage all the startups to start looking into that, you know, one way or another. You know, start tracking the right data, building up the right metrics for the company.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, V. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Actually, I want like 2 minutes advertising.
Of course.
Ventures, we actually try to, you know, maybe it's a bit buzzword. I have to admit that, but we try to declare that we try to do the data-driven investment approach. So I think the very basic thing that we try to help most of our portfolio company to do is to track the right metric, right? So we audit on the tracking mechanism, especially for companies running a lot of advertising online. So we help them to build up a lot of tracking tool to understand the customer journey. Second step is to visualize it, to really understand it and make decisions based on data, not by, you know, our feeling, right? So sometimes tech startup make a lot of decisions just based on the feeling. Whether today's nice, I would do this. But I think the second step that I would encourage all the startups to do is look at the data and try to make decisions based on the data. And then maybe, after that step, right, trying to build more advanced model to predict whatever you're trying to do, the user's behavior, and trying to automate some of the steps. So I think four steps, but at least start with the first two, right? It's no AI involved, right? Basically, just tracking the right data and look at the right data first.
Yeah, that's very important. I guess, in a sense, you are building sort of like, this tool, right, for the other companies to leverage, your existing infrastructure and, capability in order to at least get a head start.
I think what we have is just experience, right? So because I came from the e-commerce background, so what we normally help startup, even we invest or not, right? Normally when we do DD on a startup, we ask them to show us the data. We never comment whether your app is good or bad until we actually see some real data. And if they don't have it, and we like the company so much, we would have some people in our company, in the fund, to do it for them for free. And then we give it to them, right? Even we invest or not. But I do a lot of free marketing for tools like Tableau, for Power BI, for Data Studio for free, right? Because I really recommend all the startups to start using some visualization or data tool.
Cool. Yes. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So V, can I ask you a question? This is Beth.
Yes.
Do you recommend that when they start the initial discussion with you, if they have a deck, for example, that they show you in their business roadmap, that they have a few steps in their business roadmap, and that the first, if they don't have AI in the first year or two, that they show you that they're moving in the direction of the AI? Do you like to see that as a?
Yeah, I think I understand your point, but to me, right, is that the way they build a business? Is it critical for them to have some competitive advantage in the long run, if they can have lower costs and produce better quality to the customers? That's the first question I ask, right? So if that's
of course, if they're being honest about it, not if they're feeding you a bunch of dog food, sure.
If I think I always try to be mindful, right? So if the company is super small and they're throwing like AI as the buzzword, I would have some hesitation, when I look at the company, right? Because I know that's buzzword. Yeah. But again, right, if the company trying to show to the investor that they understand the values of automate some of these things and build a better predictive model in the long run, I would value that too, very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I think that's a perfect segue into our Q&A from the audience. So we have been collecting a couple of questions from online, and also we have some questions here in the audience. For the audience, please type in your question into the chat box, and then we'll get to them. But the first question I would like to ask is from Nguyen Thanh Young, Deputy CEO at Bin Group. And his question, and some of the people chime in here as well, is that what are the top 3 problems that AI can solve? And so maybe I would generalize it a bit more in terms of like not just problem, but maybe like verticals, industry areas that you think that AI would actually be very applicable here. Since we're talking about companies, right? So maybe let's start with you first, V.
Yeah, I know Yang, right? Trying to throw us, difficult questions, trying to get us use buzzwords. But to be honest, right, I think AI can make a big difference in healthcare. Right, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? So if we can collect meaningful data from patients, we can detect, early disease or cancer that would help the humans' life a lot. So I would start with healthcare, right? And I leave the rest to Beth and Megan.
Yeah. Okay, maybe Megan next.
Oh yeah, I think this is a very hard question. I think in hindsight, it'll be easy to say, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. But I don't know, if I were to take a guess, I would say, market predictions, especially when it comes to behavior within markets. So I think that's a big area where there is data that AI can come in and actually actually kind of crunch the numbers and start working against today. So that's probably one area that I would think there's a big problem that AI could address.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Megan. How about you, Beth?
I think one of the big areas that I'd like to see it focused on is more environmental modeling, large picture environmental modeling. I think we've got quite a lot of data about what's happened over the last couple hundred years, and what the acceleration is looking like in certain areas. And I think that we can make some reasonable predictions. And the predictions are looking like they're converging. But I think we need to get some better ones in areas that are getting pretty scary with atmospheric readings on air toxins. So.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, all makes sense. Healthcare, some market behavioral prediction, and then application for environmental purposes, right?
Yeah, and ocean as well, oceanography readings, that sort of thing.
Cool. V, were you about to say something?
I'm just trying to tell a joke, like stock prediction, please.
Well, especially for the crypto market, right? I would love to see someone take a stab at that. All right, so for the second question, this is probably for you, Beth. Erica, CEO and founder of Student Care, asked this. So AI now is very expensive. How can a startup apply it effectively? How much does AI cost for a startup?
Well, it depends. Yikes, it depends on what you're doing. Well, first of all of those companies have startup groups, and you get free, free units.
Credits.
And free storage. I'm sorry, go ahead, V.
Yeah, it's the credits, right?
Yeah, you get free credits and free storage, and you get all kinds of free stuff. So the question actually is, what's the platform that you're using? Are you a Microsoft shop? Are you, what do you want to be part of?
Right. Interesting. Yeah. What are the other costs, right? Besides these, let's say, we'll go, with Microsoft or Google Cloud, right? What are the other costs that you foresee?
Depending on the other costs, well, it can get pretty expensive if you're using, once you run out of credits, if you're using a lot of time on those nodes.
Yeah.
So you do need to be careful of that. There are other organizations that you can look at. NVIDIA, they have a startup program as well in AI. So if you're looking at accelerating, hardware acceleration, they've got a program.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Other costs. Well, you've got people time, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's right.
That's the most expensive thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think, besides processing power, storage, I think the hidden costs that, are actually might be quite large here would be people.
Yeah.
Would be data collection, right? How to maintain the clean, well-kept data, all of that adds up. And it might be a huge distraction to our startups, to be frank here.
Depending on what your business is. If your data collection is not part of your core business, then you are not getting on with your core business. I'm a business person, and I think anything getting in the way of doing your core business, if you're on this call, I'm assuming you're a CEO or part of the top leadership. Unless you're the CTO, if you're not getting on with the core business, anything getting in the way is getting in the way of your core business. So,
Yep.
I don't know.
Definitely.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. Okay, so let's switch to a question from the audience here, from Hui Zheng. I guess the question would be, it sounds like AI must go with other technologies to help us build a successful AI algorithm or technology, right? So what are the other technology that the company must be aware of? The guests here would be mobile first, cloud, social media. In your opinions, what are the other areas that people should be mindful about when they're building your AI? Maybe let's start with Mankit.
Oh, wow. I think like the other ones that were mentioned, mobile, social, all these things. I mean, I think they're mechanisms or areas where there is some data built up already that you can use. So I think that's why it's helpful to maybe harvest data from those areas to then train your models. So yeah, so I don't really know, like in terms of technology, like what other areas of technology are important. I think really in my head right now, the challenge is it's a data problem and a data cleanliness problem before it's an AI problem or anything. AI, it's AI's in the 80s and 90s, they called it statistics. In the early 2000s, it's called machine learning. Now it's called AI, but it's a bunch of math, right? And it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you have garbage data going in, you have garbage data going out. So, I mean, I think one interesting thought here is maybe it isn't technology that needs to be complementing your AI, and it should be China is doing this in very scary ways, which is like they just have farms of people that are making sure that the data is clean, and they do it manually, and that's how they train their AI models for very nefarious use cases, I would say. So I do think that like the technology maybe is that you should be aware of for creating a company that is more capable with AI, I guess, is maybe actually closer to home than you think. It's the traditional UI UX. How do you make that data labeling easier and better and faster for somebody to manually do? Yeah.
Interesting. Since you're mentioning about data cleanliness, there's a question from the audience about what would you do if you have data set that were corrupted, especially in industry where data is limited, disorganized, like some of the data set in Vietnam generally. Any thoughts on this?
I guess, what do you mean by corrupted? Is it just like the data was poorly gathered, or was it tampered with? I guess.
Let's go with like
yeah,
not labeled correctly or missing labels, right? Yeah.
I mean, I roll up your sleeves and clean it up. I guess that's my 2 cents there. Is like sometimes sweat equity is just as important as finding shortcuts. And maybe in the process of cleaning it up, you identify patterns that you can then use your heuristics to clean it up, and then you finally get to the point where that data is clean. But yeah, that would be kind of my thought is it's going to be manual.
Yeah, interesting. What about you, Beth? You have had a lot of experience with data, right? Any advice, any thoughts here?
Well, one of the things that we did when that happened to us was we did exactly what yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
That did happen to us once on a data set from a client, and we did exactly what Mangit said. All of us went on deck, including the client, and started cleaning it up. And the client found out what was happening on their side in that process. They actually had a problem with some of their tools. They had anyway, I can't really actually say what happened under non-disclosure, but they had a problem on their side, and it was corrupting their data as it was being saved. and it would cause them huge problems had they actually delivered it to the client. And so it was a big save on their part to send it to us to test. They wanted to test our system, and yeah, it was actually a really positive outcome for them and for us. Fortunately, it wasn't a huge data set, but it was a huge save for them, because the rest of the data set, then we got it all cleaned up, and we were able to then turn the system around and apply it to the rest of the data set.
Yeah, I guess the consensus here is there's no easy way, right? When you deal with data, that you just have to do it,
Yeah, well, the other way to do it then is, if it's not an important data set, which ideally you're not going to run your first data set on a really important data set. You can turn around and ask a partner to get you a different data set, or if that's from a partner, ask them for a different data set and run that data set. Or you can ask a learning, a university doing some data science, if you can use one of their data sets.
Yep, absolutely.
That kind of thing. That's another thing you can do. They're always willing to help out.
Yeah, there are actually a lot of different growth hacking way to get the data set that available, right? And I think it's quite interesting to follow some of those. Okay, so for the next question, I guess that would be for V. This is from Nguyen Thai Yoon, private equity analyst from Red Square, Vietnam. To what extent do financial investor or VC need to understand technology when investing?
It's a very controversial question,
Well, we love controversy in panel, so please go ahead.
I just speak from my experience, right? I think the more you know, the better, right? When you're trying to understand a company, right? And especially the company trying to say that they're applying this technology, that technology, the more you know about the technology, or I think the experience, if you've seen it before or you know how it works, it really helps in terms of doing due diligence of a company, asking the right questions, right? It's so easy to learn now. Actually, I took a course on Coursera by Andrew, right? It's very popular for machine learning. And I think I would recommend, during lockdown time, what else to do, right? Besides watching movies. So I think you can probably take a few, introductory courses to understand what it is, right? I think it's pretty much very helpful to investors really understand it. And then I'm really impressed with Mangat, the way he positioned himself as a company, right? He's not trying to throw out his company as an AI company. As investor, we really appreciate it. And at the same time, Mangat also shared that, he liked his investor rather than venture, because they really understand what he's talking about. Yeah. So as investor, I would recommend, I'm not sure, right? It's controversial because I have so many friends in the investing world. They say they don't need to study it. They don't need to understand it, right? They need to hire people to understand it. So it's hard to say, but my personal opinion, I would try to learn, myself.
Yep, absolutely. I think one of the key things that I've learned along my journey is that, you should start trying to do things yourself first before hiring other people to do it, right? So that at least you get a sense of how well they do, but definitely leave the job to the expert, when it really comes to the heavy lifting.
You don't want me writing Hello World. That's beyond Hello World. I'm definitely calling somebody else.
Yep. Hello is good enough for me. All right, so next question. The question is from Phạm Thanh Tùng, CTO of ATAD. The question is more focused on Vietnam, but I think I would love to hear all the panelists' opinion here. So why AI first, AI friendly, when it is obvious that the average of Vietnamese level is miles away from other giant techs? Why not something else first? So I think this is actually another interesting, potentially controversial question. So I would love to open to all of you for this question. Anyone want to start first? All right, Mangat.
I can go first.
Yeah.
Everybody was quiet. So actually, this kind of goes back to something that Beth mentioned earlier, which is the biases in AI, right? I think that's a very top of mind discussion in America and in the Western world, but it's also somewhat of a unique problem to the Western world. And maybe I want to get some flack on for this statement down the road. But like, the fact of the matter is most of the other countries in the world are fairly homogenous. And we live in a pretty, I think we're probably, the USA is probably one of the most heterogeneous places, countries in the world. And that's why it's really important. I think if you think about AI first from like a Vietnamese company startup perspective, think about the strengths that you can provide as a Vietnamese company in AI in general, right? Like you could provide training data that is specific to the Vietnamese market. There's cultural differences, there's behavioral differences that aren't quantified today. I think this is going to be a controversial statement, so I'm just going to preface that. The other thing is like, labor costs in Vietnam is much cheaper than it is in the Bay Area. And I think like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times it's the only way to fix something is to roll up your sleeves and clean it manually. So I think there is some level of like, I guess, labor arbitrage in the market that can happen there. But it really just depends on what is the position you want to position your company in, and what's the stage that you're positioning it on. I think there's a lot of good stuff that Vietnam can provide in terms of taking an AI first approach, and think about it don't think about it as so global, I would say. Think about it at a smaller level, and there's definitely ways that you can compete. I mean, sure, Google has millions and billions of data points, but Google probably or some of these larger companies probably are more focused on markets that they view as higher value. So I think there's room.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you, Megan. Beth or V?
Well, I have this point of view. I think it really depends on what problem you're trying to solve, right? So if you're trying to solve a problem that's very similar to some of these global companies out there, like trying to improve speech recognition, like trying to compete against Google Assistant, for example, right? I think you really need to consider your strengths, right? Compare with the resources that Google has and the amount of data that Google can collect, right? So I think if we think about it in that way, then I would reconsider the way I try to build up the business. But I talk about using Vietnam as a local market, right? And we have 100 million population. Let me use it analogy. So Viettel is a very famous telco company in Vietnam, and I think they came to market latest, but now they're number one in the market. And this is the strategy. So they recognize that in big city like Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, right? If your cell signal is like 90% already, you improve it to 95%, right? No one really understands the difference. But in rural area at the time, right? The signal was like 30%, 40%. And then they improve it to like 70%. People see the difference, and people started to use Viettel a lot because they like it when they're traveling out of Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi. So I think in Vietnam, the way I want to share my point of view is if so many companies in Vietnam don't really know how to use AI to predict or to lower cost or to provide better experience, then you have the advantage, right? You have the advantage of being the leader in the market. But when you're trying to go out, right, to compete on the global market, you need to really understand clearly where you can find your advantages, because other company like Google can have massive amount of data, or like Facebook can have massive amount of data. You cannot have that chat data. But I agree with Maggie's point, right? I think in Vietnam, another advantage that we have is it's relatively lower cost to do data labeling, right? So you can consider it as the advantage.
Yeah, love the answer. I think it makes a lot of sense, local versus global, right? Really view on the strength. What market are you trying to compete with, right? Or within? Beth, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have some thoughts actually. I think that it's very interesting to hear the concept of the Vietnam local market with 100 million people and a GDP of like $350 billion. You know, Canada only has 35.
It's Vietnamese now. Sorry, GDP around 300 billion. Right.
Yeah.
All right, that's
Yeah.
right.
350 billion US, right? I mean, I live in Canada. We have a population of like 35 million people. You're almost 3 times bigger than we are. I think that I have to, you know, vociferously agree with Mungit. You know, be proud of this country and economy, and if even if you're just thinking local, that's a big market. That's a healthy market to start in. And then, you know, Southeast Asia is a booming place. Even if you're going to just go a little outside of local, you're looking at some pretty booming areas there. And you know, I think that you have some pretty good reasons to believe that starting a company where you are as an entrepreneur, you could get some pretty healthy growth there. And you could, in a couple of years, your AI models could be extremely healthy. And as long as you're keeping them clean and you're making sure that you're, you know, stressing, keeping bias out, and being very smart about how you're managing them, and being smart about how you're thinking about what you're using it for. And always keeping your client in mind instead of keeping the AI in mind. I think that I just, you know, I don't be provincial with a small p in your thinking about the Vietnamese market. This is a, you know, you're 2.5 times the size of the country that I'm currently living in, and that's, you know, we do just fine here in Canada, just trading amongst ourselves. Even though I always tell them to think bigger. It's my job here. I move up from Silicon Valley, and I tell them, it's only 6 o'clock. Why are you taking off and going skiing? Stay. keep your business going. But yeah, I just, you've got that's a lot of money to be made there. A lot of customers to be grabbed, a lot of interesting entrepreneurship to be grabbed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely agree with all of you. And you know, I'm actually I guess optimistic and almost like a romanticist at heart. So I would throw, you know, another view here that, you know, like 5-10 years ago, right, no one thought China would rise to become the superpower in AI that they do, you know, right now. And I think a lot of these tend to, you know, massive computing infrastructure they build, right, you know, on a very low cost, you know, subsidized by the government, massive amount of data that's been collected, you know, through whether cheap labor, like Mangit was referring to, or, you know, some lax privacy policy, right, that getting these data.
Prisoner labor, I want to say, I am not proud of China's AI AI infrastructure, but yes, that's my personal opinion.
Right. It's controversial, of course, right? That how they building it and getting going. But you know, I think they are catching up with the Western world, right? Especially on image recognition, on face detection, on all those. And then, but the third piece I think would be very important as well, is the AI talents that actually going back to China to build this community, right? You know, to really build, you know, top-notch scientists in China. And so I have a lot of hopes for Vietnamese community in order to, you know, hoping that we'll be able to do something similar, you know, maybe not in a year or 3, but maybe in 5 to 10 years, you know, definitely, you know, I'm looking forward to that. And I guess that dovetails to the last question perfectly, that Hung Ngo, founder and CEO of Code Thai, Center of Talent in AI, is asking. So his question is that Steve Jobs and Tong Pham of Coupon said, tech is just a tool. Customer and biz matters much more than tech. And so his question is for the A-Star Bootcamp, right? What do you think with regarding to the theme of the bootcamp? Because some of the point here is that, for example, Andrew Ng said AI first might be great for research lab, but for business, he tends to be customer-led or mission-led, almost never technology-led. And so, for this question, I would love to talk a bit about A-Star Bootcamp. So this is the whole reason why, we were doing this series of webinar, right? And let me jump to that real quick. Okay, can you guys see my screen? All right, what is AI A-Star Bootcamp? So this is a bootcamp that founded by a group of serial entrepreneurs and AI experts with the goal to provide startup community, especially in Vietnam, a personalized assessment of how companies and businesses can integrate AI into their existing business models so that they can reach 10x, 100x transformation of their value, of the impact that they can bring. And the goal is, to help companies to find that right technology and application that's most relevant and impactful to their startups as they're going through this practical but also rigorous AI training program. The reason why we start this bootcamp is because of the 3 critical challenges that most of the startups would face. Number one is limited understanding of AI, right? So AI is the buzzword. Everyone talking about AI and AI technology, AI application. But it's just still not many people really have a deep understanding of what AI really is and how AI can help them unlock new values. And more importantly, how to measure the values here, right? And so, our network of AI experts will help companies answer this question and find the most relevant solution. And then the second thing is, now that you understand AI, but getting started is actually also challenging, right? You need to figure out, where you can apply first, how to get started, what data to collect, what resources needed within the team to build this. And then the third part is, again, data, right? How to build the data pipeline. And so, we do have a specific program at the bootcamp to help companies to answer some of the most technical questions, like how to collect data during the bootstrapping phase, what would an optimal data pipeline look like, and at what point do they actually automate the data collection process, so on and so forth. So why should founders join the bootcamp? So basically, we'll provide a personalized AI assessment. We work with each of these companies to evaluate your strength, what you need to learn, and how would you go about doing so. And we'll match you with a global AI expert network, sort of like hands-on mentors to help you going through this journey. And then for each of these, you will provide the best in class, very practical training program to really provide you with not just the knowledge, but the hands-on experience to build out your AI program. So some of the AI experts in our network, for example, Professor like Jing Zheng, from Australia, or Brislav Nakov, one of the principal scientists at Quanta Computing Research Institute, or Huing Chip, right? Some of the engineer, deep learning engineer at NVIDIA, and also now a lecturer at Stanford. And then some of the advisors that we have, like Beth Bui, head of engineer at Alexa, Amazon, graduated with PhD from Illinois, or Christopher Nguyen, he is the president at Arimo. Before that, he started several startups that got acquired along the way. Or Xavier Aguilera, CTO at Elsa. He's been building out Elsa AI pipeline and infrastructure and algorithm, from the ground up. So this program is for the mostly the CEO or CTO or the executive team of startups. And the program is structured across 12 weeks, focusing on both the technology, but also the business side. And so, really this program is not just about, technology, but it's actually providing you with the framework, with the foundation, so that you can really think about your business and how to apply AI into this, your business, and actually, bring value to you. So with that, I guess that's the end of our webinar. And thank you so much, the panelists, for joining us. It's been a great pleasure and very exciting conversation with you guys. And I hope we'll continue to have a lot more activities like this. Oh, quick answer how to apply. Please check out our website or our the NTI page, and then we'll share the link here as well. All right.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Very nice.
Thank you for having me.
All. Yeah, I hope to see you again soon.
It's a pleasure. Bye-bye.